Big polling this week out of some key swing states making a lot of news. New York Times reports Trump leads in 5 key states as young and non-white voters express discontent with Biden. A new set of Times Siena polls, including one with the Philadelphia Inquirer, reveal an erosion of support for the president among young and non-white voters upset about the economy and Gaza. So if we look at these numbers, of the 6 swing states polled, Trump leads in 5 of them. You have Biden +2 in Wisconsin, and that's it for Biden's leads. Biden down 3 in Pennsylvania, down 7 in Arizona, down 7 in Michigan, down 10 in Georgia, and down 12 in Nevada. Pretty disastrous polling there. Donald J. Trump leads President Biden in 5 crucial battleground states. A new set of polls shows as a yearning for change and discontent over the economy and the war in Gaza among young Black and Hispanic voters threaten to unravel the president's Democratic coalition. The findings are mostly unchanged since the last series of Times Siena polls in battleground states in November. Since then, the stock market has gained 25%. Mr. Trump's criminal trial in Manhattan has started, and the Biden campaign has unleashed tens of millions of dollars in advertisements across the battleground states. The polls offer little indication that any of these developments have helped Mr. Biden, hurt Mr. Trump, or quelled the electorate's discontent. Instead, the surveys show that the cost of living, immigration, Israel's war in Gaza, and a desire for change continue to be a drag on the president's standing. While Mr. Biden benefited from a burst of momentum in the wake of his State of the Union address in March, he continues to trail in the average of national and battleground state polls. The findings reveal widespread dissatisfaction with the state of the country and serious doubts about Mr. Biden's ability to deliver major improvements to American life. A majority of voters still desire the return to normalcy promised by Mr. Biden in the last campaign, but voters in battleground states remain particularly anxious, unsettled, and itching for change. Nearly 70% of voters say that the country's political and economic systems need major changes or even to be torn down entirely. Remember that. We're going to get that.
God.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I just realized my mic settings are screwed up. I just changed them. I might sound a little bit better now. Only a sliver of Mr. Biden's supporters, just 13%, believe that the president would bring major changes in his second term, while even many of those who dislike Mr. Trump grudgingly acknowledge that he would shake up an unsatisfying status quo. Sounds exactly like 2016, does it not? I mean, literally, you could say the exact same thing 8 years ago. The sense that Mr. Biden would do little to improve the nation's fortunes has helped erode his standing among young Black and Hispanic voters who usually represent the foundation of any Democratic path to the presidency. The Times Siena polls found that the 3 groups wanted fundamental changes to American society, not just a return to normalcy, and few believe that Mr. Biden would make even minor changes that would be good for the country. Yes, even minor changes.
Well, that was his campaign promise. Nothing would fundamentally change. They're taking him at his word.
That was literally the campaign promise. Absolutely. Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden are essentially tied among 18 to 29-year-olds and Hispanic voters, even though each group gave Mr. Biden more than 60% of their vote in 2020. Mr. Trump also wins more than 20% of Black voters, a tally that would be the highest level of Black support for any Republican presidential candidate since the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The polls suggest that Mr. Trump's strength amongst young and non-white voters has at least temporarily upended the electoral map, with Mr. Trump surging to a significant lead in Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada, relatively diverse Sunbelt states where Black and Hispanic voters propelled Mr. Biden to signature victories in the 2020 election. So here is the set of numbers that really says it all. Most Americans think the system needs to change, which comes closest to your view about the political and economic system in America, even if none are exactly right. The system needs to be torn down entirely, 14%. Major changes, 55%. So 69% say either we have to tear it down or at the very least make major changes. And this is where the poll just becomes devastating for Biden. And this really tells the story, not just of this election cycle, but of 2016 and likely of 2020, minus a once-in-a-century pandemic interfering at the last minute. So 13%, that's funny. I don't know who those people are. 13% thinks Biden's going to tear down the system entirely, and only 11% say he'll make major changes.
And strangely, they're all voting for Jose Vega.
Yeah, right, exactly, yes. So you have 69% of respondents say we need to tear down the system or at the very least make major changes. Only 24% of those voters think Biden will do that. 70% of voters think Trump will do that. This is the Molotov cocktail brick through the window theory that Michael Moore talked about in 2016 and was right about. That tells the whole story right there.
And things were relatively good then.
Exactly. That's like 2 Corinthians, folks. That's the whole ball game.
That's the whole ball game.
Yeah. And when you look at this, do you think the changes that this candidate, Biden and Trump, would make would be good for the country or bad for the country or neither good nor bad? 24% say somewhat or very good. 15% say neither for Biden. For Trump, 55% say somewhat or very good or neither. That nothing would change, that 32% in Biden's column, nothing would change. That's what's holding him back here, because you have a third of people saying nothing's going to change with Biden there, to the point where even if they're 50-50 on the kind of change Trump would bring, what is this? This tells the exact story. Now we actually have it in numbers. In a scientifically conducted polling survey, you see that desire for something, that desperation for something to pop. And I said this about a year ago. This was pre-October 7th. I said if you thought the conditions for Trumpism were good in 2016, they're going to be even better in 2024. And that seems to be spot on, if I might say so myself, with 69% across swing states, and that's key. So Mr. Trump fares especially well among those who believe that the political and economic systems ought to be torn down, a group that represents about 15% of registered voters. He leads among these anti-system, shorthand fine, voters by 32 points. And the tear it down voters are especially likely to have defected from the president. In contrast, Mr. Biden retains nearly all of his 2020 supporters who believe only minor changes are necessary. So there you have it. And if you dig into this a little bit more, this is specifically these swing states, 18 to 29-year-olds, Donald Trump 30, Biden 26. That's incredible. That's incredible. Bobby Kennedy actually polls 18% amongst young people, which is a huge number as well. And so if you look at that spread, the only age demographic where Biden's actually leading are the boomers, 65 and up.
Who'd have
He's
thought
losing every other demographic. Among young people, it's close. Among middle-aged people, not even remotely close. And so these are devastating numbers for Joe Biden. He got a little bit of a bounce after the State of the Union, as presidents tend to do, especially since Trump was really absent from the campaign trail during the first few weeks of his trial. He's gotten out on the road a little bit since then, had a couple of rallies, had a big one in Jersey the other day. And so you're seeing Trump really maintain a swing state lead. Those general election polls that we saw tightening, those were almost all national polls. In the swing states, Trump has maintained a lead, and now you see a lead open up to 12 in Nevada, 10 in Georgia, and Michigan +7. Those are big leads to have less than 6 months away. Now, politics can change quickly, but those are pretty big leads well outside the margin of error in very key states, swing states. And it shouldn't surprise you too much that the respondents answered those survey questions the way they did in swing states. Discontent, widespread discontent, is how those swing states became swing states. Michigan and Wisconsin didn't used to be swing states. Not even Pennsylvania, really. A little bit, but not really. Those were pretty safe blue states. That was the blue wall in 2016. And it crumbled in 2016 for the exact same reasons that you could forecast it may crumble now. So that is about as dire a set of polls as you could have expected in mid-May?
I think this is all part of a plot to kill James Carville.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. That's why
I
he's
don't think
freaking
it's
out
a
at the
coincidence
whiteboard.
they just dropped this now.
Yeah, right.
When he's clearly having a nervous breakdown with a marker and a whiteboard.
Yeah, they want to give him a heart attack.
My whole life has been for nothing.
Yeah.
All those cayenne enemas. What did they add up to? Nothing.
Yeah.
So this is all of the factors at play that were at play in 2016 among a much broader swath of the electorate. 2016, it was really about people whose middle class lives had gone up in smoke in these deindustrialized parts of the country. And now those economic conditions have spread to more people, more sectors of society. Trump won under circumstances where overall the economic situation, other than for that swath of the population, was not bad. Overall, you didn't have inflation. You had low interest rates and low inflation, something that we took for granted. You had that for a pretty long time, for over 10 years. You had a regime of low interest rates that didn't seem to spur inflation. That's why the stock market went so insane in those years. This kind of inflation, you haven't seen this since Jimmy Carter. And the results are similar. When people have these kinds of gas prices, when people have this kind of economic discontent, it's almost impossible for an incumbent to win. And throw into the mix that you've got this decrepit guy who never had a base, who never had anyone who actually supported him. There were never Biden Democrats, even when he won. Nobody ever really liked him. And he's clearly in a state of cognitive decline. Which, whatever else you say about Trump, all the libs are like, oh, he fell asleep in court. Yo, that shit's boring, man. I bet most of the people saying that would fall asleep if you had to sit in there every day.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very thin reed to hang a whataboutism kind of a charge on Trump. No, he's just like Biden. No, he's not. He's clearly much more with it. He's much more robust. He's much more energetic. He's much more vital. He doesn't come across as weak, frail, stumbling. Whether you like him or don't like him, he doesn't come across as a fragile old man who's losing his marbles, and Biden does. The Democrats are really remarkable in thinking they could foist this guy on the public. And it's again, just like with Hillary, I never thought it was a statement on how good a politician Trump is, although he has his skills. He's always been very lucky in his enemies. Hillary could not have been a better foil for Donald Trump. She was maybe the most repulsive person to ever achieve that level of high office. And the only reason she did is she married Bill Clinton. She never could have gotten there on her own with her wonderful, fetching personality. Now he's running against an obvious dementia patient. That's why nothing is sticking. Combined with the fact that as much as that brick through the window impulse that Michael Moore described was at play in 2016, times that by 10 now, and amongst a much broader swath of the population. What has Joe Biden brought us? War, inflation, which we talked about this.
I said that those are the three pillars of his campaign: are war, inflation, and censorship.
Well, and as these polls keep coming out, they're getting increasingly hysterical. We did that Morning Joe Hillary segment the other day, and wow. They just keep upping the ante on reading as a dissolute aristocracy complaining about having lost the people's love and blaming it entirely on the ignorance of the peasants. They can't imagine they did anything wrong. Jesus, when you got a poll coming out where about half of the people who said they wanted drastic change and supported Donald Trump said they thought the change would be bad. what was that, like 45% of the people in that poll thought the change would be bad? 35?
Yeah, I think it was about 45. Yeah,
I'll bring it up again. And they still want to vote for him. What does this tell you about how badly you have fucked up your responsibility as establishment managers of the society? How much have you completely alienated the voters that they would pick this guy who they don't even really seem to particularly like? They don't, as much as you want to project onto people who are going to vote for Trump that they're ignorant, they seem to understand what Donald Trump is, actually, and they still prefer him to you. Right. They still prefer him to you, and this does not lead to any self-examination, and of course it doesn't. They just get more and more hysterical about how people aren't educated enough. We have to stop the spread of misinformation. It's everything else. It's everything else. Everything but them.
Yeah, they seem, for a party so obsessed with maintaining democracy, they are remarkably incurious and uninterested about what people actually think and what they want, right? I mean, they insist that there's nothing they can do. That's what James Carville said. We covered that in the last thing. He's standing at the whiteboard. I don't know. We keep telling them January 6th was an assault on the Temple of Democracy or whatever the fuck you want to call it, and it's not working. Because they're not interested in actually responding to polls like this or polls like this, where you say here 70% trust Donald Trump to fundamentally change the system. Only 24% trust Biden to do the same thing. And if you look at this, 70%, 69% want the system changed in that way. And James Carville, not only is he blind to that when he talks most recently, but if you go back years, he has been openly and very viciously hostile to that 69% of people who want changes. He has spoken out against universal health care, against student debt cancellation. So he is not interested in actually meeting people where they're at and responding to their demands, desires, what have you. He is interested in getting people's minds right, lecturing them until they fall in line. Now, you can call that whatever you want. That's not democracy in any really healthy interpretation of the word.
One thing Winston Marshall said in his debate with Pelosi, it wasn't that anything that he said was wrong. It was just very incomplete. But that aside, he showed a bunch of headlines from after Trump's election, and you might remember this. There were all of these articles about how we have too much democracy, that democracy is a failure, that maybe we need to tweak democracy, that democracy doesn't really work. Like, they were openly attacking the idea of popular democracy because, look, it yielded Trump. And of course, they brought Plato into it very often in these articles because Plato was very skeptical of democracy because of what had happened to Socrates. So, yeah, I mean, these people fundamentally don't believe in democracy. And this is why when they see polls like this, their only response is more censorship. They absolutely cannot wrestle with the idea that the neoliberal project is leading us to a fascist revolution. They just can't. They can't, because it's like what Thomas Frank said in the interview I always recommend with him about why Donald Trump won. This is very painful for particularly people of Hillary's generation, because it would mean their entire political project was a mistake.
Please clap.